into this renovation thinking that it was just gonna be a simple tile install as per usual. Typically renovations are never that case. So as we were removing the laminate, so the laminate is something that we removed in the laundry room a couple renovation videos ago. I'll link it somewhere up on the screen. We didn't really have any problems at all with the laminate in the laundry room. So we kind of just were naive thinking that it was going to be the same situation for this second bathroom. But as we were unpeeling the laminate, we did notice there was a pretty heavily rotted area. And this was something that we already knew we were kind of suspecting, but we were kind of just being a little bit optimistic. Previously had a plumber or contractor come in and just do like a very band-aid solution fix. That's kind of what you get with paying for cheap plumbers. So there was a huge rotted area around the toilet chute. But rather than the plumber doing a thorough fix, which is to do what we did and replace the whole subfloor and yada yada yada, they instead just put like just a piece of metal essentially to make the toilet just at least sit on top and not rack. Which proved to be completely useless because as we were opening up the pretty much foundation of the house, we noticed that the reason was stemming way beneath that, and because the joists, nothing was basically holding the toilet up. So with the water rotting the subfloor, it just really exacerbated the issue, which is why so much of the decay was causing that rot, because there was just so much weak points around the subfloor. So it's kind of, I guess at the end of the day, of course, it's a huge sigh of relief that we, got very invasive and got to the studs basically to replace the subfloor, and it just gives us a lot of more peace of mind. So that is something to consider in this final tally or this final breakdown. Another thing that we knew we needed to address, but we were thinking like, how long can we let it go before we actually address it, or before it becomes a bigger problem? And that's never a good mindset. You always want to address the problem when you see it, because it could just get worse and become a bigger issue. Was the shower head had always been leaking onto the actual wall, the drywall. So it had resulted in the paint layer like bubbling, scraping the surface of the drywall and noticing that there was some molds forming. Nothing that was too extreme really, and it hadn't really spread that much. So part of us was like, oh, we could just scrape it off and then, hope that the mold doesn't come back. But David, being extremely thorough, was like, no, let's just redo that area of the drywall. So that was also another renovation that we were not really expecting as part of this bathroom renovation. But again, something that we're very happy now that it's done, that we did do. So keep those two things in mind. Let's get into the costs. I estimated some of these costs based off of what it's the price online currently, because I couldn't find the receipt, but y'all get the gist. So first and foremost, I got tile from Habitat for Humanity, which really sparked this whole renovation to start now, was because I was looking for just the perfect tile that suited my vision, and I wanted a checkered organic look with white, brown, black neutral colors, and I found just that at Habitat for Humanity. I had thought that I bought ceramic tile. I genuinely thought it's ceramic. When you go to Habitat for Humanity, all of it is just donations. A lot of it does not come with any sort of description, any SKU number, where it came from. It's just a gamble. So I bought it thinking it was ceramic, and we come home, we end up finding actually the actual tile, and it's actually marble. And so to our surprise, we're like, oh, well, marble is kind of the most luxurious of luxe type of materials, but it also is a lot more maintenance. So we weren't necessarily happy, but we weren't upset about it. So we just kind of went through with it because there's no way you can get marble for covering 50+ square foot as cheap as we got it, which is total price, including tax, including a small donation I made to Habitat, was $89 to cover more than 50 square foot. Talking about the OSB, through the video, we had to replace that little subfloor decaying section with a piece of plywood. I want to throw in, let's just say that with that small piece of with that small area, it was probably $10 worth. You know, when you buy plywood from Home Depot, Lowe's, they come in massive like 4x8 foot ones, but we just used a tiny little portion, so I'm just gonna round up and say 10. Although, like, you know, you always have plywood laying around, so I feel like that cost is almost negligible because you have some scrap. And then the OSB, so if you guys were wondering why we ended up placing basically another layer of subfloor on top, according to the tiling, there's a national tiling standard. You are supposed to make sure your subfloor is 1.25 inches thick when you're working with natural materials like marble, because marble is very fragile and it's more prone to crack. So you want to make sure that there's a very firm foundation so that it prevents it from cracking. So that's why we added an additional layer of subfloor. As opposed to the laundry room, we did not do this additional OSB. We just went we put the tile straight onto the subfloor, because for the tile in the laundry room, we were using porcelain tile. Porcelain doesn't require that. Other things that are naturally going to incur from doing a toilet removal and then putting the toilet back on. So anytime you remove the toilet, the wax ring is basically a dud. You can't use it anymore. You can't reuse that used wax ring. So we bought the wax ring and then the toilet flange. That ended up being the flange. Oh, the flange, we had to buy a more expensive one. Typically flanges are like $10, but we bought one that was $35. Reason being is because with the subfloor, the OSB, and then our tile was, I think, 1/4 inch to even more thick. That ended up being like almost 1 inch worth of extra height that we were not anticipating. And toilet flanges, the standard ones, don't go that deep. So we ended up getting a longer flange so that it could fit all that extra height that we added. Wax ring, $11, pretty standard, any wax ring. And then, so that covers, oh, and then of course Ditra, which is the waterproofing membrane. So as opposed to the laundry room, this room, because we were working in a restroom setting, we ended up putting a curdy band around the perimeter. And so the purpose of curdy band is that the water, when it's coming down from the wall, it doesn't maybe seep into the, through the molding and then into the flooring. Because the final goal of a restroom renovation is just to make sure that everything is waterproofed and no water will penetrate through anything, because that'll lead to a mold issue. And as we know, restrooms are extremely humid environments, which is just a breeding ground for mold to form. So curdy band was put along, connecting the floor to the wall to create another layer of protection. And then we also bought a toilet ring because we could have just used a regular curdy band that we were using, the roll of it, but the toilet ring is perfectly circle, so it just gives us a little bit less work we have to do. So that accounts for basically all of the subfloor under foundation work that we did. As for grout and thin set, we spent combined around $35 for that, and then the molding for the floor. So originally the plan was to just reuse the molding that we already had in the restroom, but in this restroom I felt that with such a high-end upscale looking marble floor, I felt like the old dingy molding just did not fly. So we ended up actually using the molding that we used for the rest of the upstairs hardwood flooring areas into the restroom as well. So that ended up being an additional like $30 to $40. We did have extra pieces, but very few, but we did have extra. And then I also bought some glossy paint to apply on the molding. But in addition, I just gave the whole restroom a whole new glossy paint layer because I felt like it was looking a little run down, and I feel like paint is the easiest way to make a space look extremely bright, really new again. So that can of paint was about $40. Now let's talk about the drywall expenses. So for the drywall, it cost around $20, but y'all saw like we used such a small little portion of that, like probably not even like 1 feet long or 1 feet wide by like 3 feet long. So we ended up buying a drywall piece that is anti-mold or something, so it's a little bit more expensive than your standard drywall, but once again we're trying to prevent mold as much as possible. And that drywall piece was 4 feet by 8 feet, so we spent $22-ish on that, but like we used such a nominal cost that like it's more like 5, I want to say, but for the sake of just accounting for all these costs, I'm just gonna say 22. And then the drywall tape was $11. Again, we used barely any drywall tape. And then the joint compound we actually already had. Previous tenants had leftover joint compound, but if you were to include that, it would be $11. We're not mentioning any tools that we bought for this renovation because tools are something that have always a return on your investment. So as you do more projects, you will use those tools. The money makes itself back basically. So I don't think tools are necessary to count within this renovation. So for the sum total of doing this pretty invasive full renovation in terms of doing the flooring, the fixing of the drywall, putting the toilet back on, we didn't like do any like cabinetry ourselves, or we didn't do a sink, or those things were existing. So the total price was $442, so largely because we were able to find the tile for so cheap. So anyways, if any of y'all were curious, because I know some of you guys will be, that is the total cost of the renovation. So hopefully that kind of filled in the gaps if you had any questions about this renovation and any of the cost questions. But I just wanted to have that be in here because it, like I said, is our most probably thorough renovation up to date.